An elderly woman who lived on the streets asked a millionaire to pretend to be her son and be her companion in her final hours of life in the hospital. When the elderly woman was about to die, what the millionaire was capable of doing changed everything. The public hospital corridor was crowded with people waiting for care on that cold winter morning. Eliana held her son Santiago in her thin arms, trying to calm him as he shivered with fever. The 5-year-old boy was growing increasingly pale, his sunken eyes barely able to stay open, and his breathing came in small wheezes that broke his mother's heart. She pressed her son against her chest, rocking her body back and forth, even though she knew her own tears betrayed the desperation she was trying to hide. "Everything will be fine, my love. Mommy is here with you," she murmured, kissing the boy's hot forehead. After endless hours of waiting, Santiago's name was finally called over the hospital's tired loudspeaker. Eliana rose with difficulty, her legs numb from sitting on the hard wooden bench, and carried her son to the small, poorly lit consultation room. The doctor was a middle-aged man with deep dark circles that revealed excessive shifts, and as he examined Santiago, his face became increasingly serious. He passed the stethoscope over the child's thin chest, felt his swollen belly, checked his yellowed eyes, and with each new examination, his expression became more grave. "Ma'am, I need to talk to you about your son's condition." "It's very serious," he said, removing his glasses and rubbing his tired eyes. Eliana felt the ground disappear beneath her feet as she held Santiago tighter in her arms. The doctor took the test results, spread them on the desk, and began pointing to numbers and images that she couldn't understand. Her hands trembled as she tried to comprehend those papers that seemed to contain her son's fate, but the medical terms sounded like a foreign language to her ears. "Doctor, I don't understand all these terms. What's happening to my son? Please explain it to me in a way I can understand," she pleaded, her voice choked with fear. The doctor took a deep breath, searching for the simplest words to explain something terrible. He stood up, went to a poster on the wall showing the human body, and pointed to the kidneys while speaking slowly. Santiago moaned softly in his mother's lap, oblivious to the conversation that would define his future, lost in a world of fever and discomfort. "Mrs. Eliana, your son's kidneys are shutting down. They're like 2 filters that clean the blood, and his are no longer able to do this job. Without this, toxins accumulate in his body," the doctor explained, sitting back down. Eliana hugged Santiago even tighter, as if she could protect him from that cruel reality, just with the strength of her love. Tears began to form in her eyes, but she blinked quickly to push them away, needing to be strong to hear the rest. The small office seemed to get even smaller, the walls closing in around her as the weight of those words crushed her. "But there is treatment, isn't there, doctor? Is there some medicine that can cure my boy?" "He'll do anything, work day and night to pay," she said, hope fighting against despair in her voice. The doctor took a calculator from the drawer, began making calculations on paper, writing down figures that made Eliana's eyes widen. He wrote numbers for transplant, preparatory surgeries, imported medications, specialized hospital care, an endless list of costs that added up to an impossible amount. When he finished, he turned the paper toward her, and the final number was so large that Eliana had to blink several times to make sure she was seeing correctly. "The complete treatment, with everything your son needs, would cost this much. It's the value of a house in an upscale neighborhood, Mom. Without this treatment, being very honest with you, Santiago has 3 months to live. Maybe 4, said the doctor, lowering his eyes. Eliana looked at that number, as if it were a death sentence written on paper. It was more money than she would earn in her entire life, working every day as a domestic worker, cleaning houses of rich people who spent that much on cars and jewelry. She could barely pay the rent for the damp little room where they lived, barely could buy food to feed her son. How could she even dream of such an astronomical amount? "Doctor, this is impossible. I don't have all that money, I have nothing, I have no one. Isn't there a way through the government, a waiting list? Some institution that helps?" she asked, desperation overflowing in every word. The doctor shook his head negatively, explaining the harsh reality of the healthcare system. The queue for public transplant was enormous, with people waiting for years, and Santiago didn't have that time. Even if they could miraculously get the organ quickly, Without the expensive medications to prepare the body, without specialized follow-up, without the structure of a private hospital, the chances of survival were minimal. "Ma'am, I know what I'm going to say is cruel, but I need to be honest. Without money for private treatment, there is no hope. The healthcare system and institutions won't be able to save your son in time," he said, each word weighing like lead. Santiago opened his little eyes at that moment, searching for his mother's face with that confident look every child has, believing that mommy can solve any problem. His weak little voice barely came out, but enough to break Eliana's heart even more as she struggled not to collapse right there. The boy didn't understand what was happening, didn't know his little body was failing, didn't comprehend that the world was too cruel to let a poor child live. "Mommy, when are we going home?" "I'm sleepy and my tummy hurts," he murmured, closing his eyes again. Eliana left the office carrying Santiago and a prescription for palliative medicines that would barely diminish his suffering. She walked through the hospital corridors like a ghost, aimless, hopeless, just holding her son against her chest while her mind tried to process the impossible. Other mothers passed by with their children, some crying, others praying, all united by the same despair of those who love someone who is sick. "God, why are you doing this to my son? He's just an innocent child, he's never hurt anyone," she thought, looking at the ceiling as if she could find answers. Outside the hospital, life continued as if nothing was happening. People hurried past to their appointments, cars honked in traffic, street vendors shouted their offers. The world remained indifferent to the drama of a mother who had just received the worst news of her life. Eliana sat on a bench in the square in front of the hospital, Santiago lying on her lap, and for the first time allowed herself to cry openly. "My son, forgive me. Mommy doesn't have a way to save you, doesn't have money, doesn't have anything," she sobbed, tears wetting the boy's feverish little face. It was then that a memory emerged in her mind, like a flash amid the darkness of despair. The Windsor family, for whom she had worked for 2 years. Rich people who lived in a mansion who had always been kind to her, and especially to Santiago. The lady of the house had been enchanted with the boy, always saying he was special, intelligent, that he would have a brilliant future if given opportunities. "They have so much money, so many cars, so many jewels. What if I begged them? If I got on my knees, would they lend me enough to save my son?" she thought for a moment, before pushing the idea away. Eliana knew the reality of life well, knew that rich people didn't just give money like that to housekeepers, no matter how much they liked them. The cost of treatment was too high even for them to consider lending, and she would never be able to pay it back. No one, absolutely no one, would give so much money to save the life of a poor child, the son of a domestic worker with no father, no family, nothing. No, they would never give that money. They would say they're sorry, maybe give a small contribution, but never enough to save Santiago, she murmured to herself. But then another thought began to form in her mind, an idea so painful that she tried to push it away, but it kept coming back insistently. What if she left Santiago with the Windsors? They had no children, had always shown affection for the boy, had all the money necessary for the treatment. If she simply left her son at their door, with a letter explaining the situation, perhaps they would take him in, perhaps they would save him. "No, I can't abandon my son. He's all I have, my reason for living," she thought, hugging Santiago tighter. But Santiago moaned in pain at that moment, his small body contracting, and Eliana saw the suffering etched on her son's face. 3 months of agony, that's what the doctor had said. 3 months watching her son waste away, suffer, die slowly before her eyes, unable to do anything but watch. What kind of mother would she be if she let this happen when there was a chance, however small, to save him? "If I leave him with the Windsors, they will take care of him. They will pay for the treatment. They will save him. It's the only chance he has," she concluded, her heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. Eliana spent the rest of the day wandering around the city with Santiago in her arms, memorizing every detail of his little face, recording the weight of his body, the smell of his hair, the sound of his breathing. She knew that if she did what she was planning, she would never see her son again, never hug him again, never hear him call for her again. But it was either that or watch him die in her arms, and a mother who truly loves will make any sacrifice for her child. Santiago, my love, know that everything Mommy does is because she loves you more than anything in this world. One day you will understand, she said, kissing the boy's forehead. When the sun began to set, painting the sky in orange hues, Eliana made the final decision. She returned to the small room where they lived, gathered Santiago's few clean clothes, his two favorite toys, and began writing a letter with a trembling hand. She explained about the illness, the urgency of treatment, the impossible cost for her, and begged the Windsors to save her son. Please, save my Santiago. He is a good boy, intelligent, deserves to live. I cannot do this for him, but you can. Please, she wrote, tears blurring the ink in some places. With Santiago in her arms, already semi-conscious from the high fever, Eliana walked toward the wealthy neighborhood where the Windsor mansion was located. Each step was torture, not from the physical weight of her son, but from the emotional weight of what she was about to do. People passed her on the street, no one imagining the drama of that mother, the supreme sacrifice she was making, the unimaginable pain of a forced farewell. Mommy, where are we going? I'm cold, Santiago murmured, opening his little eyes for a moment. Eliana stopped at a park near the mansion to give Santiago some water and the fever medicine the doctor had prescribed. She knew she needed to leave him as comfortable as possible for when the Windsors found him. She didn't want them to think she was a negligent mother. She took the opportunity to hug him one more time, knowing these were their last moments together, engraving in her memory the sensation of having her son in her arms. We're going to visit that beautiful house, remember? The one with the big garden and the piano you like to hear, she said, trying to appear calm. The street of the mansion was quiet at that hour, only the distant sound of some cars and the song of the last birds before they slept. Eliana stopped at the corner, observing the imposing house with its illuminated windows, imagining the family inside, dining peacefully, not knowing their lives were about to change. She took several deep breaths, trying to gather courage for what she needed to do. It's for him, it's to save him. There is no other way, she repeated mentally like a mantra. Eliana approached the mansion gate with Santiago in her arms, the boy increasingly weaker, his breathing irregular and labored. She looked around to make sure no one was watching. She didn't want to be stopped, didn't want someone to convince her not to do it. With infinite care, she laid Santiago at the entrance, just past the gate, in a place where it would be impossible not to see him when opening the door. My son, my love, forgive me. Mommy loves you so much that she needs to let you go to save you, she whispered, kissing the boy's face. Santiago opened his eyes at that moment, confused and frightened to find himself being placed on the cold ground. He extended his little arms to his mother, trying to get up, but he was too weak, and the effort made him cough, a dry and painful cough that echoed in the silent night. Eliana placed the letter on his chest, along with his toys, and took a step back, fighting against every fiber of her being that screamed to take her son back. Mommy, don't go away. Stay with me, Mommy. Santiago whimpered, his voice weak but desperate. With her heart shattered into millions of fragments, Eliana rang the mansion's doorbell and ran to hide behind a tree across the street. She could hear Santiago calling for her, trying to crawl in her direction, but then the effort was too much for his sick little body. The boy fainted right there at the entrance, his small body motionless on the cold ground, only his weak breathing showing he was still alive. My God, what have I done? What have I done? Eliana sobbed quietly, biting her hand to keep from screaming. The entrance lights turned on and Eliana saw the door open. Mr. Windsor appeared first, followed by his wife, and the shock on their faces upon seeing the unconscious child at their door was evident. The woman ran to Santiago, checked his breathing, touched his feverish forehead, and shouted for her husband to call an ambulance. The man carefully picked up the boy, and Eliana could see that he recognized Santiago, as he called his wife by name and said something she couldn't hear. "Save him, please! Save my boy!" Eliana pleaded silently, tears flowing non-stop. Mrs. Windsor picked up the letter that was with Santiago, opened it with trembling hands, and Eliana saw the exact moment when the woman understood what was happening. She brought her hand to her mouth, looked around as if searching for Eliana. But the darkness of the night and the tears in her own eyes prevented her from seeing the hidden mother. Mr. Windsor was already on the phone, and Eliana could hear fragments of the conversation, words like emergency, sick child, critical condition. Take good care of him. Give him the life I could never give, murmured Eliana, beginning to move away. But then she stopped. She needed to be sure that they wouldn't leave Santiago there, that they wouldn't just call a regular ambulance that would take him back to the public hospital. She saw Mr. Windsor run to the garage and return with a luxury car, while his wife wrapped Santiago in a clean, warm blanket. They were taking the boy personally. They weren't abandoning him. They were caring for him as if he were their own. Thank you, Eliana whispered, relief mixed with the pain of separation. The private ambulance arrived quickly, even before the Windsors left with their car, the sound of the siren cutting through the quietness of the wealthy neighborhood like a cry of urgency. Eliana immediately recognized the golden symbol of San Rafael Hospital on the side of the gleaming white vehicle, the same place where the rich went when they needed the best treatment money could buy. Two paramedics jumped out of the vehicle before it had even completely stopped, carrying equipment she had never seen in the public hospital, silver cases full of modern devices, a special padded pediatric stretcher. Where is the child? We received a call for a serious pediatric emergency. Need for mobile ICU, asked one of them, already running toward the entrance of the mansion. The Windsors practically carried the doctors to Santiago, who remained unconscious on the floor of the entrance, his small chest rising and falling irregularly, his face as pale as paper under the strong light of the entrance. The more experienced paramedic knelt beside the boy, his agile fingers checking pulse, examining pupils, feeling the swollen abdomen, while the other was already preparing a pediatric oxygen mask. Eliana could see the concern on the professional's face when he examined Santiago's yellowed eyes, when he felt the extremely high fever, when he noticed the clear signs of kidney failure. We need immediate venous access. Prepare heated saline solution and call the hospital. Warn them we have a possible acute nephritic syndrome in a child of approximately 5 years, he ordered his partner while beginning to work. With precise and quick movements, they placed Santiago on the pediatric stretcher, wrapping him in a special thermal blanket that would maintain his body temperature during transport. The younger paramedic tried several times to find a good vein for access, but Santiago was so dehydrated that it was difficult, needing to use a special flashlight to visualize the blood vessels through the skin. Mrs. Windsor covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her face as she saw the pitiful state of the boy who had so often played in her home. My God, he's so ill. You need to save him, do anything. We'll pay for everything, she exclaimed, holding Eliana's letter against her chest. The portable heart monitor began to beep as soon as it was connected to Santiago, showing numbers that made the paramedics exchange worried looks. The pressure was dangerously low, the heartbeats irregular, the oxygen saturation dropping even with the mask providing pure oxygen. The doctor grabbed his radio and began speaking rapidly with the hospital, using technical terms that sounded terrifying even to those who didn't understand. Central, this is Mobile Unit 03. We have a pediatric patient in critical condition, possible acute renal failure, requires urgent hemodialysis. Estimated time of arrival, 8 minutes. Prepare pediatric nephrology team and ICU, he transmitted, while adjusting medications in the IV bag. Mr. Windsor was already on the phone with someone important at the hospital. Eliana could hear fragments of the conversation as he practically ordered them to prepare everything. His voice had the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, of someone who had power and money to make things happen. I want Dr. Mendez waiting at the entrance. He's the best pediatric nephrologist in the country. And prepare the private ICU suite, with all necessary equipment. I don't care about the cost, this boy will receive the best possible treatment, he said, pacing back and forth while the paramedics worked. Santiago had a small spasm at that moment, his little body contracting slightly, and a weak moan escaped from his dry lips. The paramedic immediately checked his pupils again, concerned about possible seizures, and adjusted the medication in the IV to prevent them from getting worse. Mrs. Windsor knelt beside the stretcher, taking Santiago's little hand between hers, gently caressing it while murmuring words of comfort. "Hang in there, little one. You'll be all right. We're going to take care of you. Your mother entrusted you to us and we won't let her down," she said, her voice choked with emotion. Eliana had to cover her mouth with both hands to stifle the sob that wanted to escape when she saw the scene. The gentle way Mrs. Windsor held Santiago's hand, the care of the paramedics, Mr. Windsor's determination to ensure the best treatment, all confirmed that she had made the right decision, no matter how much it hurt. Her son was in good hands, was being treated as a rich child would be treated, with all available resources, all chances of survival. "This is what you deserve, my love. This is what Mommy couldn't give you," she thought, tears blurring her vision. The paramedics began to move the stretcher toward the ambulance, with Mrs. Windsor still holding Santiago's hand, refusing to let it go. Mr. Windsor carried Eliana's letter and the boy's few belongings, while giving more instructions on the phone, mentioning something about contacting the best specialists, bringing doctors from other states if necessary. The determination on his face was clear. That boy would be saved no matter the cost or effort required. "We're going with you in the ambulance. He can't be alone, he's scared," Mrs. Windsor insisted, already entering the vehicle. The interior of the ambulance was like a miniature mobile ICU, with equipment that shone under the white light, monitors showing graphs and numbers that Eliana didn't understand, drawers full of medications and instruments that could save lives. Santiago was connected to even more devices, a small oximeter on his tiny finger, electrodes on his thin chest monitoring his heart, a special medication bag being slowly administered into his vein. The lead paramedic didn't take his eyes off the monitors, adjusting something here, checking something there, totally focused on keeping the boy stable. Heart rate rising, good response to medication. "Keep the solution warm, he's hypothermic," he instructed his partner. Mrs. Windsor had sat on a small bench beside the stretcher, still holding Santiago's hand, and was now reading Eliana's letter aloud to her husband, her voice breaking at several moments. Eliana couldn't hear the exact words, but she could see their impact on the couple's faces, the understanding of the sacrifice a mother had made, of the desperation that had led her to that extreme act. Mr. Windsor discreetly wiped his eyes, clearly moved, and placed his hand on his wife's shoulder in a gesture of support. "We'll save him, dear. We'll give him everything he needs. It's the least we can do," he said, his voice firm despite the emotion. The ambulance doors closed with a definitive sound that echoed in Eliana's heart like the end of a chapter in her life. Through the rear windows, she could see the glow of the equipment, the silhouettes of the Windsors leaning over her son, the paramedics working tirelessly to keep him alive. The siren began to sound, loud and urgent, and the red and blue lights painted the houses on the street in emergency colors as the vehicle began to move. "Critical condition. We need to act fast. Hospital, prepare for our arrival, unstable patient," she heard the paramedic say over the radio, confirming the gravity of the situation. Eliana emerged from her hiding place and took a few stumbling steps toward the street, watching the ambulance gain speed, the siren becoming more distant with each second. Her heart screamed to run after it, to stop that vehicle and take her son back, but her mind knew that would condemn him to death. The ambulance lights grew smaller and smaller until they turned the corner, disappearing from her sight, taking away the only thing that mattered in her life. "Live, my son. Live and be happy. Mommy will always love you, even from afar," Eliana whispered one last time, before falling to her knees in the middle of the dark, empty street, her heart breaking into millions of pieces for leaving her son, the person she loved most in the world, the only person she had. The silence that followed after the ambulance's departure was deafening, broken only by Eliana's muffled sobs as she slowly got up and began to walk in the opposite direction. Each step took her further away from Santiago. Each meter increased the distance between mother and son, but also increased his chances of survival. She didn't look back, she couldn't, because she knew that if she did, she wouldn't have the strength to continue. Now he has a chance. Now he will live. That's all that matters. I had to do everything in my power to save him, even if it breaks my heart, she repeated to herself, disappearing into the darkness of the night, leaving behind her heart along with her son. 20 years had passed since that fateful night, when Eliana disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind her heart along with her son. The city's financial district bustled with the frantic energy of another business day. Mirrored glass towers, reflecting the afternoon sun, hurried executives crossing the wide sidewalks in their impeccable suits. Santiago Windsor, now 25 years old, was leaving one of the most imposing towers, adjusting his Italian silk tie while checking messages on his cutting-edge cell phone. The meeting had been a success. Another million-dollar contract closed. Another step up the ladder of the business empire he was building with the same determination his adoptive parents had taught him. "We closed the deal, Dad. I even got better terms than we expected. I'll stop by the square before heading back to the office," he said on the phone, his voice confident and professional. The central square was an oasis of green amid the concrete and glass of the financial center, with its leafy trees offering shade to wooden benches and the large fountain in the center, spewing crystalline water that sparkled under the sun. Santiago decided to cross it as he always did, when he needed to clear his thoughts after intense meetings, appreciating the contrast between the calm of the green space and the bustle of the surrounding offices. People of all kinds circulated there: executives on lunch breaks, street vendors offering their products, retirees feeding pigeons, mothers with baby strollers enjoying the sunny day. "It's good to breathe some fresh air after spending hours in that closed meeting room," he thought, loosening his tie a bit. It was then that he noticed a small commotion near the fountain, or rather, he noticed the absence of commotion where there should have been one. A figure was lying on the Portuguese stone pavement, clearly in distress, but people were walking around, some deliberately avoiding, others pretending not to see, all too hurried or too afraid to get involved. It was an elderly woman, her worn and dirty clothes indicating life on the streets, her thin and fragile body contorted in an uncomfortable position as if she had fallen and couldn't get up. Santiago felt a pang of indignation seeing people's indifference, the same kind of anger he always felt when witnessing injustices or disregard for the most vulnerable. How can people simply ignore someone in need of help? Where is their humanity? He muttered, already changing direction. He ran to the elderly woman, throwing his expensive jacket on the nearest bench without caring, and knelt beside her on the rough ground, not minding that his suit would certainly get dirty. Up close, the situation was even more serious than it had appeared from afar. The woman's lips had a worrying purplish color, her breathing came in irregular and difficult gasps, her whole body trembling in spasms that didn't seem natural. Santiago immediately checked her pulse on her neck, finding it weak and irregular, and noticed that her skin was cold and damp to the touch, signs he recognized from a first aid course he had taken. "Ma'am, can you hear me? Stay calm, I'll help you." "Don't worry, everything will be fine," he said. Using his calmest and most reassuring voice, the woman opened her eyes with difficulty, and Santiago found himself staring into brown irises that seemed to carry the weight of decades of suffering. Even through the haze of pain and confusion, there was something in those eyes that deeply disturbed him, an inexplicable familiarity that made his heart race for no apparent reason. Before he could process this strange sensation, her hand moved with surprising quickness for someone so debilitated, grabbing his wrist with a strength that didn't match her fragile appearance. Her fingers, rough and calloused from a hard life, closed around his arm like desperate claws. "My boy, my Santiago, you came. I knew you would come," she whispered, her hoarse voice barely audible over the noise of the fountain. Santiago was paralyzed for a moment, his own name spoken by this stranger sending chills down his spine. How did she know his name? Was it coincidence? Was she delirious and confusing him with someone else? But there was something in the way she said those words, a mixture of love, pain, and regret that touched something deep inside him, something he couldn't identify. He gently tried to release his wrist, but she held on even tighter, her eyes silently pleading for something he didn't understand. "Ma'am, my name really is Santiago, but I think you're confusing me with someone else. I'll call for help. You need urgent medical attention," he replied, already reaching for his cell phone with his free hand. While Santiago dialed the emergency number, the woman began speaking again, her words coming out broken and confused, mixed with moans of pain. She talked about hospitals, about unfulfilled promises, about sacrifices that no one would understand. fragments of a story that made no sense, but somehow resonated within him. Her hands were violently trembling now, and Santiago could see she was struggling to remain conscious. Her eyes repeatedly closing and opening as if she were fighting a battle against the darkness threatening to engulf her. "Please, don't let me die alone. Pretend to be my son. Just for a few hours, at the hospital. Promise?" she begged, tears streaming down the deep wrinkles of her face. The request was strange, even disturbing, but there was so much genuine desperation in her voice, such loneliness and fear, that Santiago felt his heart tighten. He had lied in negotiations before, had feigned interest in boring conversations at business dinners, small social lies that didn't hurt anyone. What harm would there be in giving this poor woman some comfort in what could be her final hours? What kind of person would he be if he denied this small gesture of humanity to someone so clearly in need? "All right, ma'am. I'll pretend to be your son at the hospital. Don't worry, you won't be alone," he promised, gently squeezing her hand. A weak smile appeared on the woman's dry lips, and for a brief moment her eyes shone with something that looked like peace. But then her body was seized by a convulsion, her hand finally releasing Santiago's wrist. He quickly turned her on her side to prevent her from choking, supporting her head while trying to keep her stable, feeling helpless in the face of the gravity of the situation. "Hold on, please! The ambulance is coming! Don't give up now!" he shouted, even knowing she couldn't hear him. Santiago looked around for help, but people continued passing by indifferently, some even taking pictures with their phones, but no one approaching to help. A man in a suit stopped for a moment, seeming to consider whether he should get involved, but then looked at his expensive watch and continued walking, muttering something about being late. A young woman with designer shopping bags made a disgusted face upon seeing the elderly woman on the ground and took a wide detour to avoid passing near. "You're all cowards! How can you live with yourselves?" Santiago shouted at the indifferent crowd, his anger overflowing. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was only minutes, the sound of the ambulance siren cut through the air, growing louder as it approached. Santiago frantically waved to the paramedics when the vehicle stopped near the fountain, two professionals quickly jumping out with their equipment. They were efficient and professional, checking the woman's vital signs, applying oxygen through a mask, preparing her for transport with practiced and precise movements. "How long has she been like this? Do you know if she has any pre-existing medical conditions?" one of them asked while preparing an IV line. Santiago explained what he had witnessed, mentioning the symptoms he had observed: the respiratory difficulty, the coloration of her lips, the tremors, everything that could help with the diagnosis. The paramedics exchanged concerned looks as they worked, clearly recognizing the gravity of the situation. One of them muttered something about possible kidney failure, the other mentioned the need for urgent tests. They carefully placed her on the stretcher, connecting her to portable monitors that began beeping with concerning readings. "She's in very bad shape. Are you a relative?" "Someone needs to accompany her to the hospital," said the older paramedic, already preparing to leave. Santiago hesitated for a fraction of a second, thinking about his packed schedule, the meetings set for the afternoon, the commitments he had. But then he looked at the face of the unconscious woman on the stretcher, remembering his promise, the desperation in her eyes when she begged not to die alone. His schedule could wait, business could be rescheduled, but this woman needed him now, even if he didn't exactly understand why. I'm her son. I'll go with you," he responded, climbing into the ambulance without looking back. The interior of the ambulance was cramped and full of equipment, with Santiago squeezed onto a small bench while the paramedics continued working on the woman. The monitors displayed numbers he didn't fully understand, but the tense faces of the professionals told him everything he needed to know about the severity of the situation. The woman remained unconscious, her face now with a frightening paleness, her breathing so weak it barely moved her chest, even with oxygen being supplied. "Pressure dropping. We need to move faster." "Call the hospital. Tell them we're coming with a critical patient," one paramedic instructed the other. During the turbulent journey to the hospital, with the siren cutting through traffic and the vehicle swaying around curves, Santiago couldn't take his eyes off the woman's face. There was something disturbingly familiar about those features, something that went beyond their brief interaction in the square. It was like looking at a painting you know you've seen before, but can't remember where or when. Even under the layers of dirt and the marks of time, there was a facial structure, a shape of nose, something that provoked an unsettling feeling in his chest. "Who are you? Why do I feel like I know you?" he thought, wishing she would wake up to answer his questions. The hospital finally appeared ahead, a large modern complex with its busy emergency department constantly receiving ambulances. The paramedics had already communicated their arrival by radio, and a medical team was waiting at the entrance, ready to receive the critical patient. The transfer was quick and efficient, with the woman being taken directly to the emergency room, while Santiago was directed to fill out paperwork and was instructed to wait in the waiting room while the doctors worked, an aseptic space with uncomfortable chairs and a muted television showing news that no one really watched. He sat down, still processing the events of the last few minutes, trying to understand why he was there, why he cared so much about a stranger. His phone vibrated constantly with messages and missed calls from his secretary, partners. Important people expecting important answers, but he ignored them all. "Mr. Windsor? Sorry, but I need you to sign these terms of responsibility," said a nurse, handing him more papers. While waiting, Santiago observed the other people in the waiting room, each dealing with their own crises and tragedies. A young mother cradled a feverish baby. An elderly man held his wife's hand as she slept in a wheelchair. A teenager frantically typed on his phone with eyes red from crying. Everyone there was united by the same fear, by the same powerlessness in the face of human life's fragility. It's strange how illness equalizes everyone. "It doesn't matter how much money you have when you're in a waiting room," he reflected, for the first time really considering his own mortality. After what seemed like an eternity, but was just over an hour, a doctor in a white coat and serious expression approached Santiago. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair and tired eyes, of someone who had seen too much, carrying a clipboard full of tests and notes. Santiago rose immediately, his heart accelerating with apprehension, preparing himself for news he knew wouldn't be good. "Mr. Windsor, I'm the doctor responsible for your mother." "We need to talk about her condition," said the doctor, his voice professional but compassionate. The doctor guided Santiago to a small private room, away from the movement of the waiting room, a space clearly designated for difficult conversations. He spread the exams on the table, pointing to images on X-rays, his fingers tracing dark and light areas that represented failing organs. Santiago watched attentively, trying to comprehend those spots that defined a person's life or death. "Mr. Windsor, I'll be direct. The patient has multiple organ failure. The liver is compromised, the heart is weak, but the most serious is this right here," said the doctor, pointing to a specific area of the X-ray. The doctor took a pen and circled a region on the exam, where there should be 2 kidney-shaped organs, but there was only one. His eyes met Santiago's with professional seriousness as he held the exam against the light for better visualization. "She has only one kidney, Mr. Windsor. This scar here indicates an old nephrectomy, probably for donation, and this single kidney is failing rapidly. Only immediate surgery can save her," he explained, placing the exam on the table. Santiago felt the air escape from his lungs as he processed that information. His hand involuntarily went to his own right side, where under his expensive shirt was a scar he had carried since childhood, a reminder of the transplant that saved his life when he was 5 years old. "Doctor, did she donate a kidney? How long ago? Is there any record of that?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. The doctor consulted the papers again, leafing through pages of incomplete medical history, looking for information that could clarify the situation. He ran his finger over hastily made notes by the emergency team, comparing them with test results. "From the appearance of the scar and the type of incision, we estimate about 20 years. It was a voluntary donation, not a removal due to disease. The recipient must have been very lucky. That kidney saved a life. But now, ironically, her remaining kidney is in total collapse," the doctor replied, closing the folder. The doctor stood up, indicating they needed to act quickly. He looked at the clock on the wall and then back at Santiago, the urgency evident in every gesture. "Mr. Windsor, I need to be very clear about the chances. With her current condition, even with surgery, the probability of survival is minimal. We're talking about less than 10%. Do you understand what I'm saying? He asked, needing confirmation before proceeding. Santiago nodded, swallowing hard as he processed the gravity of the situation. This woman he didn't even know, whom he had met by chance, was on the verge of death, and for some reason, it mattered more than it should. Doctor, do everything possible. No matter the cost, no matter the chances. If there's a possibility, however small, try, he responded, his voice firm despite the internal turmoil. The doctor nodded and asked Santiago to sign the consent forms for the high-risk surgery. As Santiago filled out the papers, his hands trembled slightly, the responsibility of deciding someone's fate weighing on his shoulders. "Can I see her before the surgery? Just for a moment?" he asked, handing over the signed documents. The doctor led him through the white, brightly lit hospital corridors to the preoperative preparation area. The smell of disinfectant was strong, mixed with that indefinable odor all hospitals seem to have. Nurses moved efficiently between beds, checking equipment, administering medications. "She's sedated but still partially conscious. You can talk to her. Sometimes it helps patients to know that someone is there," said the doctor, opening the curtain of one of the bays. Eliana was lying on the hospital stretcher, connected to various machines that beeped rhythmically. She'd been cleaned and dressed in standard hospital gown, and without the dirt from the streets, Santiago could better see her features. The face marked by time had a delicate bone structure, traits that provoked that unsettling sense of familiarity. "Hello, you're going into surgery now, but I'll be here when you wake up." "You're not alone," he said softly, taking her fragile hand. Eliana opened her eyes for a brief moment, those brown eyes meeting his with surprising intensity for someone so debilitated. Her lips moved, trying to form words, but only an almost inaudible whisper came out. "My boy, you stayed. Thank you for pretending to be. My son," she murmured, a solitary tear running down her face. As Santiago watched, a nurse began to prepare Eliana for surgery, adjusting the hospital gown. It was then that he clearly saw the scar on her left side, an old white line that almost perfectly mirrored his own. The nurse noticed his fixed gaze while checking the patient's vital signs. "It's a very old donation scar. Whoever received that kidney was very lucky. She saved a life many years ago," commented the nurse, writing numbers on a clipboard. Santiago had to lean against the wall for a moment. The coincidences were too many to ignore. The timing, the type of surgery, the way she had said his name in the square, everything pointed to a possibility he barely dared to consider. "Who are you really? Why do I feel like I know you?" he thought, observing Eliana's now unconscious face. Suddenly, the monitors connected to Eliana began to beep frantically, red lights flashing in alarm. The sharp, urgent sound echoed through the space, causing nurses to run from all directions. The cardiac monitor showed erratic lines, pressure numbers rapidly dropping, the oximeter indicating dangerously low levels. "Code blue! We need the doctor here now, she's going into cardiac arrest!" shouted a nurse, running to get the emergency cart. Santiago was pushed back as the medical team invaded the space around Eliana. The emergency cart hitting against the wall, while nurses tore open packages of syringes and prepared medications. The lead doctor climbed onto the stretcher, positioning his hands on Eliana's fragile chest to begin compressions, his weight making the structure creak with each movement. Each compression was deep and violent, her small body jerking with the force needed to manually pump blood through her veins. 1, 2, 3, 4. "Come on, Eliana. Adrenaline now. Where's the defibrillator?" he shouted, sweat already running down his forehead. The controlled chaos of the medical team was both hypnotizing and terrifying, with each professional executing their function with trained precision. One nurse injected medications directly into Eliana's vein, another prepared the defibrillator, while a third monitored vital signs and shouted the readings. Santiago stood paralyzed in the corner, watching this woman he barely knew fighting between life and death, his own heart beating erratically as if accompanying the drama. "She can't die now. Not before I understand what's happening," he thought, clenching his fists until his knuckles turned white. After endless minutes of compressions and medications, the doctor stepped down from the stretcher and grabbed the defibrillator paddles. He rubbed conductive gel on the metal plates, while another doctor continued compressions, maintaining minimal circulation until the last possible second. The device emitted a high-pitched sound while charging, the numbers on the screen rising to maximum charge. "Clear, charge at 300, he shouted, positioning the paddles on Eliana's chest. Eliana's body arched with the electric discharge, lifting completely off the stretcher for a fraction of a second before falling limp again. All eyes turned to the cardiac monitor, waiting, praying for any sign of activity. The line remained flat for agonizing seconds, the silence in the room broken only by the continuous alarm of the equipment. "Nothing. Continue compressions. Prepare another dose of adrenaline," ordered the doctor, already recharging the defibrillator. The compressions immediately resumed, the younger doctor taking position, putting all his weight into each movement. Eliana's chest sank and returned in an unnatural forced rhythm, while more medications were injected into her veins. Santiago could see the growing desperation on the professionals' faces, the recognition that time was running out, that each second without natural circulation increased the risk of irreversible damage. "How long has it been? 5 minutes? 6? "Come on, Eliana, fight!" shouted the lead doctor, preparing for another attempt. The second discharge was even stronger, Eliana's body convulsing violently before falling again. This time there was a moment of hope when the monitor emitted a solitary beep, but soon returned to deadly silence. A nurse checked Eliana's pupils with a small flashlight, shaking her head negatively to indicate they were fixed and dilated. Pupils unresponsive. 7 minutes of arrest. "Doctor, should we—" she began, but was interrupted. The lead doctor ignored the implicit suggestion to give up, climbing back onto the stretcher to personally resume compressions. His coat was soaked with sweat, the muscles in his arms trembling from the effort, but he continued with fierce determination. Between compressions, he spoke to Eliana as if she could hear him, as if his words could bring her back. "You survived 20 years on the streets with only one kidney. You're not giving up now. Your son is here, waiting," he shouted, not knowing how true his words were. Santiago felt a chill run down his spine hearing those words. He approached the glass, pressing his palms against the cold surface, wishing he could do something, anything to help. The coincidence of the single kidney, the way she had said his name, everything pointed to a connection he still couldn't fully comprehend. "Please don't die. I need to know who you are. I need to understand why you called me son," he murmured, his breath fogging the glass. After 3 more minutes of frantic efforts, when everyone was beginning to lose hope, the impossible happened. A weak beep sounded from the monitor, followed by another and another, establishing an irregular but present rhythm. The doctor stopped the compressions, everyone in the room holding their breath as they watched the line on the monitor form small peaks, evidence that Eliana's heart had decided to fight. "We have a pulse, weak but present. Stabilize her quickly." "Prepare for transfer to the ICU," shouted the doctor, stepping down from the stretcher with trembling legs. The room exploded in renewed activity, but now with a different purpose, keeping Eliana alive. Medications were adjusted, monitors recalibrated, tubes checked and repositioned. Santiago observed everything with a mixture of relief and anxiety, knowing that although she had survived the cardiac arrest, she was still far from being out of danger. She is strong, stronger than she looks. She will survive, she needs to survive, he thought, wiping the cold sweat from his own forehead. Eliana was carefully transferred to a special transport stretcher, surrounded by portable equipment that maintained her vital functions. The medical procession moved quickly through the hospital corridors toward the intensive care unit, with Santiago following at a respectful distance. He could hear the doctors discussing the case as they walked, mentioning terms like hypoxic damage, acute renal failure, need for urgent dialysis. "Mr. Windsor, your mother is a fighter, but the next few hours will be critical. She needs dialysis immediately," said one of the doctors, turning briefly to him. The ICU was a different environment from the rest of the hospital, quieter despite the constant beeping of machines, more controlled despite the severity of the patients admitted there. Eliana was placed in an isolated bed, surrounded by even more equipment, including the dialysis machine that would be essential for her survival. Specialized nurses took over care, checking every detail, every parameter, every sign that could indicate changes in her condition. "We'll keep her sedated for now. Her body needs to rest after the trauma of the arrest," explained the head nurse to Santiago. Santiago was led to a small waiting room attached to the ICU, where he could wait without disrupting the work of the medical team. He sat heavily in the chair, the weight of events finally hitting him completely. His mind was spinning with unanswered questions, connections that seemed impossible but were becoming increasingly likely. "I need to know more about her. I need to understand who donated the kidney to me 20 years ago. It might just be a coincidence, but I need to know," he decided, picking up his phone. While Eliana remained unconscious, silently fighting for her life, Santiago began making calls. First to his secretary, cancelling all appointments for the next day. Then to the hospital's records department, requesting access to old files. He needed to see his own medical records from when he was a child, needed to confirm his suspicions about the transplant that saved his life. "Yes, Santiago Windsor. I need the records from 20 years ago, when I was 5 years old." "It's urgent," he said on the phone, his voice loaded with determination. The wait was agonizing, but finally an archive clerk appeared with a folder yellowed by time. Santiago opened it with trembling hands, leafing through documents that told the story of a 5-year-old boy on the brink of death, saved by a last-minute kidney transplant. The crucial document was in the middle of the folder: anonymous donor, perfect compatibility, left kidney. The date corresponded exactly to the period the doctor had estimated for Eliana's surgery. "It can't be a coincidence." "It's impossible to be a coincidence," he muttered, the pieces of the puzzle fitting together. Santiago spent the following hours immersed in the documents, looking for any clue about the donor's identity. The records were frustratingly vague, mentioning only that the donation was voluntary and anonymous, that all compatibility tests were perfect, that the procedure was performed urgently due to the critical state of the recipient. There was a curious note about the donor having insisted on absolute anonymity, refusing any future contact. Why would a mother do this? Why would she leave her son with other people, donate her kidney to him when the family had paid for the surgery, and then disappear? He questioned himself, trying to understand. When the sun began to rise, tinting the sky with pink hues through the hospital windows, a nurse appeared at the waiting room door. She had a cautious smile, the kind that healthcare professionals use when they have news that is neither entirely good nor entirely bad. Santiago stood up immediately, the papers scattered on his lap falling to the floor. "Mr. Windsor, your mother is waking up. She's confused and agitated but conscious. Would you like to see her?" she asked gently. Santiago followed the nurse to Eliana's bed, his heart beating rapidly with anxiety and expectation. Eliana was connected to multiple machines, including the ventilator that helped her breathe and the dialysis machine that did the work her kidney could no longer do. Her eyes were open, moving erratically around the room, clearly disoriented and frightened. "Eliana? Can you hear me? It's me, Santiago. You're in the hospital. You're safe," he said softly, approaching the bed. Eliana's eyes focused on him with difficulty, pupils still dilated from the medications. She tried to speak, but the respirator tube prevented it. Her hands moved weakly, trying to reach for something, and Santiago instinctively took one of them between his. The touch seemed to calm her momentarily, but then tears began to stream down her face. "Don't try to talk now. Rest." "I'll stay here with you," said Santiago, gently squeezing her hand. The nurse adjusted the medication in the IV, explaining that Eliana was receiving mild sedatives to keep her calm, in addition to strong painkillers for the pain. The recovery process would be long and difficult, especially considering her age and previous condition of living on the streets. Santiago observed Eliana's face as she fought against the sleep induced by the medications, her eyes constantly returning to him with an expression that mixed love, pain, and regret. "She looks at me as if she knows me. As if she has known me for a long time," he thought, his heart tight. Eliana stayed awake for only a few minutes before the medications pulled her back to sleep. But in those brief moments, Santiago saw something in her eyes that deeply disturbed him. Recognition. Not the vague recognition of someone who remembers a face, but the deep recognition of someone who knows every detail, every expression, every nuance. She knows who I am. She always knew, he understood, the truth weighing on his chest. The following hours were a roller coaster of small improvements and worrying relapses. Eliana woke periodically, each time a little more lucid, but still unable to speak due to the respirator. The doctors explained that they would need to keep her intubated for at least another day, until they were sure she could breathe on her own. During these moments of consciousness, she squeezed Santiago's hand with surprising strength, as if afraid he would disappear. "I'm not going anywhere. I promise I'll stay," he repeated, each time she woke up. It was during one of these moments of wakefulness, when the midday sun was streaming strongly through the window, that something changed. Eliana was more alert, the effects of the sedatives weaker, allowing greater mental clarity. She weakly gestured for Santiago to come closer, her eyes begging to be understood. He leaned in, coming close enough to feel her machine-assisted breathing. "What is it? What do you need to tell me?" he asked softly. Eliana raised her trembling hand and touched the right side of Santiago's abdomen, exactly where his transplant scar was. The gesture was deliberate and precise. There was no doubt about what she was indicating. Then she pointed to her own scar on the left side, her finger trembling with the effort. Her eyes filled with tears again as she moved her lips, forming silent words around the tube. You gave me your kidney? Was it you?" asked Santiago, his voice breaking with emotion. Eliana nodded affirmatively, tears flowing freely now. She tried to speak again, fighting against the tube, becoming agitated with the frustration of not being able to communicate. The nurse rushed to calm her, adjusting the sedatives, but Eliana fought against sleep, desperate to convey her message. "Calm down, please. When they remove the tube, you can tell me everything," begged Santiago, but Eliana kept trying. With great effort, Eliana managed to articulate a word that Santiago could read on her lips. "Forgiveness." She repeated it several times, her eyes pleading, her hand squeezing his with desperation. Then, fighting against the medications trying to drag her back into unconsciousness, she formed more words. "My son." "You are my mother? My real mother?" asked Santiago, tears now streaming down his own face. Eliana nodded again, her body shaking with silent sobs. She pointed to her heart, then to Santiago, then made a gesture that he interpreted as always. Always loved him, always been around, always regretted. The sedatives finally won her fight, and she slid back into sleep, but not before Santiago saw in her eyes 20 years of pain, sacrifice, and unconditional love. "Mother. My mother was alive all this time," he whispered, the revelation hitting him like an avalanche. Santiago remained by the bed, holding Eliana's hand as she slept, processing the magnitude of what he had just discovered. His biological mother was not only alive, but had given a kidney to save him and then disappeared. Why? What had happened 20 years ago that led her to make such a sacrifice and then live on the streets? Did the Windsors know? Did they always know? He questioned himself, anger beginning to mix with confusion. The rest of the day passed in a haze of conflicting emotions. Santiago alternated between watching Eliana sleep and obsessively reviewing the medical documents, searching for answers that weren't there. Doctors made regular rounds, checking vital signs, adjusting medications, always with cautiously optimistic expressions. The recovery was progressing, but Eliana was still far from being out of danger. Kidney function isn't improving as we hoped. She'll need regular dialysis, perhaps permanently, one of the doctors informed. When night fell again, bringing with it the peculiar quietness of hospitals after visiting hours, Eliana woke up once more. This time there was something different in her eyes, determination. She gestured to a nurse, insistently pointing to the breathing tube, clearly wanting it removed. The nurse hesitated, explaining she would need medical approval. "Please call the doctor. She needs to speak to me," Santiago requested, understanding the urgency in Eliana's gaze. The on-duty doctor arrived, and after carefully examining Eliana, agreed to do a test. If she could breathe on her own for a few minutes, they would consider removing the tube. Eliana nodded vigorously, determined to succeed. The process was difficult and uncomfortable, but she fought bravely, breathing on her own despite obvious discomfort. "It's going well. We'll remove the tube, but if there's any sign of difficulty, we'll have to re-intubate her," the doctor warned. The removal of the tube was a delicate and unpleasant process, leaving Eliana coughing and choking, but when it finally ended, she was breathing on her own, though with difficulty. Her voice, when she finally managed to speak, was hoarse and weak, barely more than a whisper, but the words that came out were clear and devastating. "Santiago, my son, forgive me. I gave you my kidney. It was the only way. To save you," she said, each word a monumental effort. Santiago held his face in his hands, tears streaming between his fingers. 20 years of lies, 20 years of believing his mother was dead, 20 years not knowing she had made the ultimate sacrifice for him. Anger, confusion, gratitude, love, all emotions clashed inside him like waves in a storm. "Why? Why did you leave me? Why did you pretend to be dead?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. Eliana tried to answer but began to cough violently, her body too weak for the effort of speaking. The nurse rushed to help her, placing an oxygen mask over her face, helping her calm down. But Eliana pushed it away after a few moments, determined to continue. "I had no money for the treatment. The Windsors could save you. I couldn't afford to pay, only donate the kidney," she said, the words interspersed with difficult breaths. Before she could continue, the monitors began to beep again, but this time with a different alarm. The nurse quickly checked the levels and her face went pale. Eliana's kidneys had completely stopped functioning, not even the minimal urine production they maintained before. She needed immediate dialysis, but the ICU machine was being used on another critical patient. "We need to transfer her to the dialysis center now. It can't wait," shouted the nurse, already calling for help. The transfer was hastily organized, but the public hospital's dialysis center was full, with no slots available for emergencies. Doctors discussed alternatives while time passed, and toxins accumulated in Eliana's blood. Santiago could see confusion beginning to take over her, her eyes losing focus, her words becoming disconnected. "No, I can't. Die. Need to. Tell. Everything," she mumbled, struggling to maintain consciousness. Finally, they secured a spot at another hospital, but it would be necessary to transfer her by ambulance. The preparation process for transport was complex, with Eliana needing to be connected to portable equipment, medications adjusted for the journey. Santiago insisted on accompanying her, refusing to leave her alone again. "I'm going with her. I don't care about the rules, I won't abandon her," he said firmly to the doctors. During the preparations for the transfer, Eliana began to become increasingly agitated. The toxins accumulated in her blood were affecting her brain, causing confusion and hallucinations. She grabbed Santiago's arm with surprising strength, her eyes wide with fear. "Don't let them take me. I promised never to see you." Again, but couldn't, always nearby, always watching. She was delirious, the words coming out in a confused torrent. The medical team worked quickly to stabilize her for transport, administering medications to control her agitation. But while being placed on the transfer stretcher, Eliana began experiencing involuntary muscle spasms, a worrying sign that the toxins were reaching dangerous levels. The doctor in charge looked gravely at Santiago. "We need to go now. Every minute counts, if we can't dialyze her soon," he said, leaving the sentence unfinished but the implication clear. The ambulance was waiting at the emergency entrance, engine running, ready to depart. Eliana was quickly carried inside, with Santiago climbing in right after. The paramedics connected her to portable monitors, constantly checking her vital signs. The journey would be only 15 minutes, but every second counted. "Hang in there, Mom, please hang in there," Santiago begged, holding her hand. They had traveled only halfway when Eliana began to convulse. Her entire body contracted, back arching, limbs rigid. The paramedics immediately began administering anti-convulsant medication, trying to protect her from injuring herself. The driver accelerated, the sirens screaming through the city streets. "Tonic-clonic seizure, duration 30 seconds and counting," shouted a paramedic. The seizure seemed to last an eternity, but finally the spasms subsided and Eliana lay still. Too still. One of the paramedics quickly checked her breathing, and his eyes widened with alarm. He immediately tilted her head back, checking the airways. She stopped breathing. "Preparing for emergency intubation," he shouted, grabbing the necessary equipment. The paramedic worked with urgent precision inside the moving ambulance, inserting the tube down Eliana's throat, while his partner kept her head stabilized. Santiago watched in horror, his hands gripping the seat until his knuckles turned white, the vehicle swaying around curves as the driver raced through the city streets. The tube finally went in, and the paramedic quickly connected the oxygen bag, manually pumping air into Eliana's lungs. "Airways secured, but she's critical. We need to get there soon. Call the hospital. Let them know we're coming with a patient in extremely critical condition," he shouted to the driver. Santiago grabbed his phone with trembling hands and dialed his personal lawyer's number, one of the most powerful men in the city in terms of connections. As the ambulance sped through the streets, he shouted instructions over the phone, demanding that the best private hospital in the city prepare a room, that the best doctors be summoned, that all necessary equipment be ready. "I don't care about the cost. I want Dr. Smith, the country's best nephrologist, waiting at the entrance, and prepare the best dialysis machine you have," he ordered, his voice cutting through the noise of the siren. The ambulance made a sharp turn, and Santiago saw through the window that they were approaching not the public hospital they were originally heading to, but Hospital São Santiago, the most expensive and exclusive in the city. His lawyer had achieved the impossible in minutes, redirecting the ambulance and ensuring immediate care. The gates of the private hospital opened, and a complete medical team was already waiting at the emergency entrance, with a special stretcher and state-of-the-art equipment. "I managed to change the destination." "She's going to get the best possible treatment now," thought Santiago, jumping out of the ambulance as soon as it stopped. Eliana's transfer was executed with military efficiency, the private hospital team immediately taking over her care. They rushed through immaculate corridors, passing expensive artwork and ornamental plants, a shocking contrast to the patient's critical condition. Dr. Smith, a distinguished man with grey hair and rimless glasses, was already giving orders while accompanying the stretcher. "Prepare the emergency hemodialysis room. I want immediate central vascular access. And bring the portable ultrasound. I need to evaluate the remaining kidney now," he commanded with authority. Eliana was taken directly to a private treatment room, a spacious and well-equipped space that looked more like a luxury hotel suite than a medical room. The dialysis machine was already prepared, a state-of-the-art equipment that cost more than many houses. Specialized nurses worked with precise movements, cutting Eliana's clothes, connecting monitors, preparing venous access. "Mr. Windsor, we'll need your authorization for high-cost procedures. We're talking about significant amounts," said an administrator, approaching with a clipboard. Santiago signed all the papers without even looking at the values, his attention entirely focused on Eliana being prepared for dialysis. Dr. Smith was inserting a central catheter into her neck, a delicate procedure that would allow the necessary access for hemodialysis. Eliana moaned even though sedated, her body reacting to the invasive procedure, and Santiago had to fight against the impulse to run to her. "Don't worry about money. Do whatever is necessary to save her." "She's my mother," he said, the words still strange on his lips. With the catheter positioned, the team began connecting Eliana to the dialysis machine. The tubes were filled with her blood, creating a circuit that would pass through special filters to remove the toxins her kidneys could no longer process. The process was visually disturbing, seeing blood leaving the body, passing through the machine and returning, but Santiago couldn't look away. "We'll start slowly. Her body is very weakened. Filtering too quickly could cause shock," explained Dr. Smith, adjusting the machine's controls. As soon as the machine started working, Eliana began to writhe in bed, even with the sedatives. Her face contorted in an expression of pain, and a low moan escaped her lips. The dialysis process, especially in someone so sick, could be extremely uncomfortable. The blood being pulled and returned, pressure changing, the body reacting to the rapid removal of toxins. Increase the painkiller but keep her partially conscious. I need to evaluate neurological responses, ordered the doctor, carefully observing the monitors. Eliana opened her eyes slowly, consciousness returning in confused waves. She looked around, clearly disoriented by the luxurious environment, so different from anywhere she had been in the last 20 years. Her eyes found Santiago and widened with surprise and fear, as if she couldn't believe he was still there. "Santiago, you shouldn't spend so much money on me. This isn't right," she whispered, her voice hoarse and weak. Santiago approached the bed, taking her free hand, careful not to disturb the medical equipment. Her hand was cold and shaky, the skin thin as paper, marked by years of hard life on the streets. He could feel the fragile bones beneath the skin, could see the protruding veins, evidence of a life of deprivation and suffering. "Don't worry about that now, you need to get better. We'll talk about everything else later," he said, trying to sound reassuring. Dr. Smith approached with a portable ultrasound device, explaining that he needed to examine Eliana's remaining kidney to assess the level of damage. He spread gel on her abdomen and began passing the transducer, observing the images on the small screen. His expression became increasingly serious as he examined, occasionally pausing to make measurements and notes. "The kidney is severely damaged. Extensive scarring, minimal function. It's impressive that it has lasted so long," he commented, more to himself than to the others. While the doctor worked, Eliana began to become more alert, the pain medications allowing her to think more clearly despite the discomfort of dialysis. She observed Santiago with a disturbing intensity, as if she were memorizing every detail of his face, as if at any moment he might disappear. "You grew up so handsome, just like your father. But you have my eyes. I always knew you would be a good man," she murmured, tears beginning to form. Santiago felt a lump in his throat with those simple words. He had never known his biological father, not even his name. The Windsors had only said that he had died before Santiago was born, one more of the many half-truths that were now beginning to reveal themselves. "My father, who was he? What happened to him?" he asked, leaning in closer. Eliana closed her eyes, more tears running down the deep wrinkles of her face. Dr. Smith was now preparing a needle for biopsy, needing to collect a sample of kidney tissue for more detailed analysis. He applied local anesthesia, but Eliana still shuddered when the needle penetrated. "Your father died in a construction accident when you were 3 months old. After that, it was just the two of us against the world," she said between difficult breaths. The biopsy procedure was quick, but clearly painful, despite the anesthesia. Eliana squeezed Santiago's hand with surprising strength, her tense body struggling to remain still, as the doctor had instructed. As soon as it was finished, the doctor applied pressure to the site to prevent bleeding, and a nurse covered it with a special dressing. "I'll take this to the laboratory. We'll have results in a few hours. Continue the dialysis. We'll need at least 4 hours today," he instructed the team. With the doctor temporarily absent, Eliana seemed to gather strength to speak. The dialysis machine hummed beside her, blood visibly circulating through transparent tubes, and she weakly gestured toward the equipment. "This must cost a fortune. They shouldn't spend so much on an old beggar like me," she said, shame evident in her voice. Santiago felt anger rising in his chest, not directed at her, but at the whole situation, the injustice of a mother feeling unworthy of her own son's care. He gently held her face, forcing her to look into his eyes, wanting her to understand that none of that mattered. "You are my mother. You gave me life twice, when I was born, and when you gave me your kidney. No money in the world can repay that," he said firmly. Eliana began to sob, the movement causing the monitors to beep in alarm. A nurse rushed to check, adjusting the position of the catheter that had moved slightly. The repositioning caused visible pain in Eliana. "Sorry, I know it hurts. I'll adjust the pain medication," said the nurse, increasing the drip of the analgesic. As the medication took effect, Eliana seemed to float in a state between consciousness and sleep, but continued talking, as if the words had waited 20 years to come out. She told about the days after Santiago's father's death, how she worked 3 different jobs to pay rent and food. She cleaned houses in the morning, washed dishes at a restaurant in the afternoon, cleaned offices at night. I worked 16 hours a day every day to pay for your medicines, but it was never enough. You got sick and your kidney began to fail. The surgery price was too expensive. I had no way to pay, but I knew they would help you. It was the only way I had. To save you, she narrated, her voice broken. Santiago listened in silence, his heart tight, imagining his young mother, alone, desperate, working to the physical limit to try to save her son. He could see in her eyes the memory of those terrible days, the growing desperation as he worsened, and she couldn't gather money for treatment. When you found out you were compatible to donate the kidney, what was it like? He asked softly. Eliana took a deep breath, which caused a stab of pain from her bruised ribs from the resuscitation. She waited for the pain to pass before continuing, her eyes lost in painful memories. The sound of the dialysis machine was hypnotic, a constant rhythm that seemed to mark the pace of her revelations. I found out they paid for the surgery, and I took the test in secret. When the result came showing perfect compatibility, I cried with joy. It was the only thing I could give you to save you. I knew they had paid for the surgery and treatment, so I donated the kidney secretly. It was all I could do. I did everything I could so you would live, even if away from me. I couldn't bear to live in a world where you weren't my son, she said, more tears flowing. The nurse had to interrupt to check Eliana's vital signs, measuring pressure, temperature, checking oxygen levels. The numbers weren't ideal, but stable enough to continue treatment. During the check, Eliana shuddered when the nurse moved her arm, and Santiago noticed old and new bruises all over her skin. She shows signs of severe malnutrition and multiple contusions. We'll need a complete nutritional assessment too, commented the nurse to another colleague. When they were relatively alone again, Eliana continued her story. She told about the secret surgery, how she lied at the hospital saying the recipient was a distant nephew, how she signed all anonymity papers so they could never connect her to Santiago. Recovery was much harder than she expected. A post-operative infection kept her in the hospital for weeks. When I left the hospital, I had no job, no home, nothing. But you were alive, and that was worth every second of suffering, she said, squeezing his hand. Suddenly, the dialysis machine alarms began to sound. Eliana's blood pressure had dropped drastically, a common but dangerous side effect of rapid fluid removal. Dr. Smith, who had just returned, rushed to adjust the settings, reducing the filtration rate. Electrolyte imbalance. We need sodium replacement now, and reduce ultrafiltration by half, he ordered. Eliana turned pale and began to sweat cold, her body shaking uncontrollably. Santiago held her hand tighter while the medical team worked to stabilize her, injecting saline solutions, adjusting medications, monitoring every change in her vital signs. It was tense minutes until finally her pressure began to rise again. This happens sometimes. Her body is not used to such intensive treatment, explained the doctor, wiping his own sweat from his forehead. As soon as Eliana stabilized, she insisted on continuing to talk, as if she knew time was precious. She told about her first years on the streets, how she learned where to get food, where it was safe to sleep, how to survive the cold and rain. But the most painful part was when she told about the times she tried to see Santiago from afar. I would go to your school and hide behind the trees. I just wanted to see you play, grow, be happy with your friends, she confessed, her voice breaking. Santiago felt hot tears running down his face as he imagined his mother hiding behind trees or walls, watching him grow from a distance, never being able to approach, never being able to hug him. All this time he believed she was dead, while she was there, always nearby, always caring from a distance. Why did you never approach? Why didn't you tell me the truth? He asked, his voice choked. Eliana began to answer, but the nurse had to interrupt again. The vascular access was showing signs of obstruction, the blood flow dangerously decreasing. It would be necessary to reposition or perhaps even change the catheter, a painful procedure that Eliana would have to endure. I need to adjust the catheter. It will hurt, but it's necessary to continue the dialysis, warned the nurse, preparing the necessary materials. It's almost over, Mom. Be strong. You are the strongest person I know, he encouraged, using the word mom naturally for the first time. Finally, the catheter was successfully repositioned. Eliana was exhausted, sweat covering her face, but there was determination in her eyes. She took several deep breaths before continuing her story, reaching the part that was clearly the most painful. "When you turned 10, I couldn't stand the distance anymore. I went to the Windsor mansion," she began, her voice trembling. Eliana told how she had waited outside the gates of the Windsor mansion for hours, gathering courage. She didn't want to disrupt Santiago's life. She just wanted to see him up close once, maybe hear his voice, know that he was well and happy. When she finally rang the doorbell, she was prepared to beg, to humiliate herself, to do anything for just 5 minutes with her son. "I just wanted to see you up close once. You didn't even need to know who I was. I just wanted to hear your voice," she said, tears flowing freely now. Santiago felt a cold anger begin to grow in his chest as Eliana continued. She told how Mrs. Windsor recognized her immediately, how horror passed over the rich woman's face, seeing the deplorable state of Santiago's biological mother. Mr. Windsor was called, and together they made it clear that Eliana was not welcome, that Santiago was happy and adjusted, that seeing her would only disturb him. "They said you thought I was dead, and that it was better to keep it that way forever," sobbed Eliana. The dialysis machine continued its work, slowly cleaning Eliana's blood as she revealed the most painful truth. The Windsors not only sent her away, they threatened to call the police if she appeared again, said they would have her arrested for disturbance and harassment. They were clear. Santiago was their son now, legally and emotionally, and Eliana had no rights over him. "They threw me out like I was trash. They said I was dead to you and that it was better you never know the truth," she revealed, barely able to speak between sobs. Santiago rose abruptly, the chair falling backward with the sudden movement. The anger he felt was like fire in his veins, a fury unlike anything he had ever experienced. The Windsors, the people he called parents whom he loved and respected, had done this to his real mother. They had no right. "You are my mother. How could they do this to you?" he shouted, punching the wall forcefully. The nurse approached Santiago carefully, noticing his agitation after Eliana's revelation. She checked the monitors to ensure that all the commotion had not affected the patient's vital signs, who was now sleeping deeply due to sedatives. Eliana had finally succumbed to exhaustion after telling her painful story, her face still showing traces of the tears she had shed. The dialysis machine continued its vital work, the rhythmic sound filling the silence of the room. "Mr. Windsor, your mother is stable now. The treatment will continue for 2 more hours. Perhaps it would be good for you to get some fresh air," the nurse gently suggested. Santiago took several deep breaths, trying to process everything he had just discovered. He looked at Eliana sleeping, so fragile and small in the hospital bed, surrounded by equipment that kept her alive. It was difficult to reconcile the image of this elderly, sick woman with the young mother who had sacrificed everything for him 20 years ago. He approached the bed and gently touched her hand, feeling the thin skin and protruding veins. "I'll talk to them, Mum. I need to understand what happened," he murmured softly. He left the hospital after ensuring with the medical team that Eliana was stable and would be well cared for in his absence. Dr. Smith assured that the dialysis treatment was progressing well and that she would be sleeping for the next few hours due to the medications. Santiago walked to his car in the parking lot, each step heavy with the weight of the revelations he had received. The afternoon sun beat down strongly on the asphalt, creating mirages on the horizon. "I need to talk to them. I deserve to hear the complete version of the story," he thought, getting into the vehicle. The journey to the Windsor mansion was filled with conflicting memories. Each street brought memories of a happy childhood, of loving parents who had always been present, who supported him in every achievement and consoled him in every defeat. How to reconcile these memories with the revelation that they had separated him from his biological mother? Santiago drove slowly, needing time to organize his thoughts before the inevitable confrontation. "They love me. Of that I never doubted. But why did they do this to her?" He questioned himself, turning onto the familiar street. The Windsor mansion appeared before him, majestic as always with its classic architecture and impeccable gardens. Santiago parked and stayed in the car for a few moments, observing the house where he had grown up. Each window, each detail of the facade told a story of his life there. He couldn't simply erase 20 years of love and care, but he also couldn't ignore what they had done to Eliana. They are my parents too. They raised me, loved me. I need to hear their side, he decided, getting out of the car. The maid who answered the door was surprised to see him, as he hadn't notified them about the visit. She led him to the living room where the Windsors spent their afternoons, announcing his arrival with the usual formality. Santiago entered the familiar room, where so many important conversations in his life had taken place. "Santiago, dear, what a wonderful surprise. We weren't expecting you today," exclaimed Mrs. Windsor, rising with a genuine smile. Mr. Windsor also stood up, setting aside the book he was reading. They approached to hug him as they always did, and Santiago allowed the embrace, feeling the familiar affection he had always known. But when they separated, he looked them in the eyes with a seriousness that made them realize something was different. "Mom, Dad, we need to talk about something very serious. About my biological mother," he said, using the titles he had always used for them. The change in the Windsors' faces was immediate. Mrs. Windsor put her hand to her heart, her eyes instantly filling with tears, while Mr. Windsor closed his eyes for a moment, as if he had been waiting for this moment for years. They looked at each other, decades of complicity in a single glance, and Santiago knew they understood exactly what was happening. "You found her, didn't you?" "Eliana is alive," said Mrs. Windsor, more of a statement than a question. Santiago nodded, observing how Mrs. Windsor sat heavily in her armchair, tears already running down her face. Mr. Windsor remained standing, but Santiago could see the weight on his shoulders, as if years of secrecy were finally taking their toll. "She's in the hospital. Very sick. She's dying, actually. The kidney that remained after she donated hers to me is failing," Santiago explained, keeping his voice calm despite the inner turmoil. Mrs. Windsor sobbed audibly, covering her face with her hands. Mr. Windsor went to her, placing his hand on her shoulder in a gesture of support, before turning to Santiago. There were tears in the eyes of the man Santiago had rarely seen display emotions so openly. "How is she? Can we help in any way?" "What does she need?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. Santiago sat in the armchair that had always been his since childhood, the familiar leather creaking softly. He observed his adoptive parents, seeing in them not villains but people who had made difficult and possibly wrong decisions. "She's receiving the best possible treatment, but she told me about when she tried to see me 15 years ago. She said you sent her away," he said, needing to hear their version. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with years of guilt and regret. Mrs. Windsor was the one who broke the silence, her voice trembling between tears. She told about that afternoon 15 years ago, when Eliana appeared at the gate. How her heart had frozen with fear upon seeing Santiago's biological mother, how panic had taken over at the thought that they might lose the son they loved so much. "We were so afraid, Santiago. You were our entire life. The possibility of losing you was too terrifying," she confessed. Mr. Windsor continued, explaining that they had recognized Eliana immediately, despite her deteriorated state. She had begged just to see Santiago from afar, promising not to identify herself, not to interfere. But they had panicked, imagining scenarios where Santiago would discover the truth and choose to leave them. It was pure selfishness and fear. "We didn't think about her suffering, only about our own fear of losing you," he admitted, shame evident in his posture. Santiago processed the words, trying to put himself in their place. People without biological children, who suddenly find themselves parents of a sick child, who invest all their love and resources to save and raise him. The fear of losing that child must be overwhelming. "But you told her that I thought she was dead, that it was better that way. That was cruel," he said with no accusation in his voice, just sadness. Mrs. Windsor nodded, more tears streaming down. She stood up and went to an old cabinet, from which she took a wooden box that Santiago had never seen before. With trembling hands, she brought it and placed it on the coffee table, opening it to reveal its contents. Inside were photographs, documents, detective reports, years of documented surveillance. "We watched her all these years, Santiago," We always knew where she was, she revealed. Santiago picked up some of the photographs, seeing Eliana at different ages and situations throughout the years. Always from afar, always alone, always near places he frequented. There were photos of her near his school, the park where he played soccer, even near the university years later. In all of them, she kept her distance, just observing. You knew she was following me, that she was always nearby, he asked, his voice breaking. Mr. Windsor nodded, taking one of the reports and showing it to Santiago. They were detailed notes about attempts to indirectly help Eliana, money left anonymously, meals paid for at restaurants she frequented, even attempts to find shelter for her. But Eliana always refused when she discovered the origin of the help, her pride preventing her from accepting anything from the Windsors. We tried to help Santiago, but she never accepted anything that came from us. She said she didn't want charity from those who wouldn't allow her to see her son, he explained. Santiago continued examining the documents, finding medical reports about Eliana's health condition over the years. The detectives had documented her gradual deterioration, the multiple hospitalizations, the cold nights on the streets. It was a detailed record of suffering that could have been avoided. Why didn't you tell me? When I became an adult, why did you maintain the lie? He asked, looking at both of them. Mrs. Windsor sat down again, taking her husband's hand to find strength to continue. She explained that as the years passed, the lie became increasingly difficult to undo. The initial fear had transformed into paralysis, the impossibility of admitting what they had done. Each passing year made the revelation more difficult, more painful, more impossible. We knew that one day you would find out, but we were too cowardly to tell you ourselves, she admitted. Santiago stood up and walked around the room, observing the picture frames with family photos, memories of trips, graduations, happy moments. In all of them he smiled, surrounded by the Windsors' love, completely unaware of Eliana's sacrifice and suffering. It was a life built on a foundation of genuine love, but also painful omission. You gave me everything. Education, opportunities, love. But you took away her right to be my mother, he said, touching a photo from his graduation. Mr. Windsor stood up and approached Santiago, stopping at a respectful distance. His face showed years of guilt finally being confronted, but also the unwavering love he had always had for his adoptive son. Santiago, we don't expect your forgiveness. What we did was wrong. But you need to know that every decision, however wrong it was, came from a place of love for you, he said, his voice breaking. Santiago turned to face them, seeing not the villains of a tragic story, but the parents who had dedicated their lives to him. Imperfect people who had made terrible decisions driven by fear, but who had also given him all the love they had. The situation was too complex for simple judgments. I understand your fear. I understand the love. But she suffered for 20 years alone because of this fear, he said, his voice full of contained emotion. Mrs. Windsor suddenly stood up, determination replacing despair on her face. She looked at her husband, who nodded, understanding her intention without words. Then she turned to Santiago, straightening her shoulders like someone who has made an important decision. We want to see her. We want to ask for forgiveness. We don't expect her to forgive us, but we need to try, she declared, already picking up her purse. Santiago was surprised by their sudden determination. Mr. Windsor was already getting the car keys, and Mrs. Windsor was fixing her appearance, cleaning the traces of tears. It was as if years of paralysis had been broken, and now they were ready to face the consequences of their actions. She is very weak. I don't know if she'll want to see you, Santiago warned, but already walking toward the door. The trip back to the hospital was made in silence, each of the three lost in their own thoughts. Santiago drove with the Windsors in the back seat, the tension palpable in the air. Occasionally he looked in the rearview mirror and saw Mrs. Windsor squeezing her husband's hand, both clearly nervous about the meeting that was to come. Thank you for giving us this chance, Santiago. Even if she doesn't forgive us, we need to try, said Mr. Windsor, breaking the silence. When they arrived at the hospital, Santiago guided them through the familiar corridors to the intensive care area. With each step, he could feel the Windsors' apprehension increasing. Mrs. Windsor had begun to tremble slightly, and Mr. Windsor was paler than normal. Before entering the room, Santiago stopped and turned to them. "She may not react well. She's weak and still processing a lot. Be gentle," he asked. Santiago opened the door softly, entering first to check if Eliana was awake. She was conscious, although clearly tired, still connected to the dialysis machine. When she saw Santiago, a small smile appeared on her lips, but disappeared immediately when she saw the figures behind him. Her eyes widened in shock and something that looked like fear. "Santiago, what are they doing here? Why did you bring them?" she asked, her voice weak but loaded with emotion. Mrs. Windsor stepped forward but stopped when Eliana visibly recoiled. Tears were already streaming down the older woman's face as she observed Eliana's deplorable state, the reality of 20 years of suffering evident in every line of her face. "Eliana, I know we don't have the right to be here, but we needed to come. We need to ask for forgiveness," she said, her voice trembling. Eliana looked away, focusing on the window as if she could escape through it. Her body was tense despite the weakness, and the monitors began to beep softly, indicating an increase in heart rate. Santiago went to her, taking her hand gently, trying to transmit calm and security. "You don't have to talk to them if you don't want to, Mum, but they wanted to try," he said softly. Mr. Windsor approached the other side of the bed, maintaining a respectful distance. He observed Eliana for a moment, truly seeing the result of their decisions before speaking. His voice was heavy with regret when he began. "Eliana, what we did was unforgivable. We didn't allow you to have 20 years with Santiago out of pure selfishness and fear. There is no excuse for that," he said, each word clearly difficult. Eliana finally looked at them, her eyes full of a complex mixture of emotions, anger, hurt, sadness, and perhaps a touch of something softer. She tried to speak, but had to clear her throat first, her voice hoarse from emotion and medications. "You treated me as if I were nothing, as if my love for him didn't matter, as if the fact that I didn't leave him at your house out of pure sacrifice to save him," she said, each word cutting through the air. "Mrs. Windsor could no longer contain herself. She approached the bed and, surprising everyone, knelt beside it. Tears flowed freely down her face as she looked at Eliana, all her usual composure completely undone. "You gave him life twice. First when you had him, then when you gave your kidney, and we repaid you by not allowing him to be with you. Please, Eliana, forgive me," she begged, sobbing. The room fell silent, except for the sounds of medical equipment and Mrs. Windsor's muffled sobs. Eliana looked at the woman kneeling beside her bed with an indescribable expression. Slowly, with great effort, she moved her free hand toward Mrs. Windsor. "You took care of him, gave him everything I couldn't give. For that I am grateful," said Eliana, her voice breaking. Santiago watched the scene with a heavy heart, seeing the three people he loved most trying to navigate through 20 years of pain and secrets. Mr. Windsor had approached his wife, helping her to stand up but remaining close to the bed. Eliana observed them with tired eyes, but something softer now. "I hated you for a long time, but seeing Santiago now, the man he has become, I know you did a good job," she admitted. Mrs. Windsor took a handkerchief and cleaned her face, trying to regain some composure. She looked at Eliana with a mixture of gratitude and guilt, clearly struggling with conflicting emotions. "Eliana, we want to help now. Anything you need, any treatment, we want to be here. Not to compensate, that's impossible, but because it's the right thing," she offered. Eliana closed her eyes for a moment, clearly exhausted by the emotional intensity of the moment. When she opened them again, there was a decision in her gaze. She looked at Santiago, then at the Windsors, and finally extended her trembling hand toward Mrs. Windsor. "We cannot change the past, but perhaps for Santiago's sake, we can try some kind of peace," she said, her hand trembling in the air. Mrs. Windsor took Eliana's hand gently, as if it were something precious and fragile. The touch was hesitant at first, two women who had been positioned as rivals by fate finally connecting. Mr. Windsor placed his hand on Santiago's shoulder, and for a moment the four people who had been separated by secrets and lies were united. "Thank you, Eliana. Thank you for giving us this chance," whispered Mrs. Windsor. Eliana squeezed Mrs. Windsor's hand lightly, a small but significant gesture. Her eyes were moist with unshed tears as she looked at the three of them. Santiago could see the effort this was costing her, how difficult it was to set aside 20 years of hurt. Santiago needs all of us. He always has. Maybe it's time to stop fighting over the past and think about his future, said Eliana, her voice weak but determined. The moment was interrupted by the return of the nurse, who needed to check Eliana's vital signs and adjust the dialysis machine. But something fundamental had changed in the room. The barriers of 2 decades had begun to fall, and in their place, hesitant attempts to build something new were emerging. "We'll let you rest now, but we'll be back tomorrow if you allow," said Mr. Windsor, looking at Eliana. Eliana nodded weakly, clearly exhausted but also more at peace than Santiago had seen her since he found her. As the Windsors prepared to leave, she called to them one last time. "Thank you for loving my son. Even with everything that happened, thank you for making him the good man he is today," she said, closing her eyes. Santiago stayed a few more moments with Eliana while the Windsors waited in the hallway. He held her hand, feeling how fragile she was, but also feeling a strength that wasn't there before. "You were very brave, Mother. I know how difficult this was," he said softly. Eliana opened her eyes and looked at her son with all the love she had stored up for 20 years. She raised her hand and touched his face, memorizing every detail as she had done so many times from afar. "They truly love you, Santiago. And you love them too. Don't let my story destroy that," she said, always thinking of him first. When Santiago left the room, he found the Windsors embracing in the hallway, both still emotional from the meeting. They turned to him with questioning expressions, clearly unsure about how to proceed. Santiago hugged them, the three forming a circle of imperfect but real family. "Let's take one step at a time. She needs time. We all do," he said. In the room, Eliana watched through the window the family walking away down the corridor through the reflection in the glass. She extended her trembling hand toward Mrs. Windsor, who was still visible, a gesture of reconciliation that, although hesitant, marked the beginning of something new. "Maybe it's possible. Maybe after all this suffering we can find some peace," she murmured to herself, her hand still tremblingly extended in the direction where they had departed. The days following the meeting at the hospital were transformative for everyone involved. Santiago coordinated daily meetings with the medical team, while the Windsors mobilized their international contacts in search of a compatible donor. Dr. Smith had been clear. Eliana would need a kidney transplant soon, or dialysis would not be enough to keep her alive for much longer. The hospital meeting room had become an operations center, with papers scattered about, phones constantly ringing, and a palpable determination in the air. "We've found 3 possible donors in Europe, but we need to do the compatibility tests urgently," Mr. Windsor informed, hanging up another international call. Mrs. Windsor had taken responsibility for making Eliana's room more welcoming, bringing fresh flowers daily, soft pillows, and even a small radio to play gentle music. Eliana initially resisted such pampering, unaccustomed to being cared for after so many years of solitary survival. But gradually she began to accept the gestures of affection, especially when she saw they came from a genuine place of regret and desire for reparation. "I brought lavender today, Eliana. I remember you liked the smell when you worked in our house," said Mrs. Windsor, arranging the vase on the small table. Santiago divided his time between work, which he had delegated almost completely to his team, and the hospital. He arrived early every morning, had breakfast with Eliana while she underwent her morning dialysis, and stayed until late at night, telling her about his life, filling in the 20-year gaps. Eliana listened to each story with rapt attention, her eyes brightening when he told of achievements, filling with tears when he spoke of difficult moments when she couldn't be there to comfort him. "When I graduated from university, I looked for you in the audience. Even though I thought you were dead, some part of me hoped to see you there," confessed Santiago, holding her hand. The search for a compatible donor was proving more challenging than expected. Eliana had a rare blood type and specific antibodies that made compatibility extremely difficult. Mr. Windsor had contacted hospitals across 5 continents, offering substantial rewards for any information on compatible donors. Each passing day without success increased the tension, as Eliana's condition, though stable, was precarious. "I just spoke with a hospital in Japan. They have a potential donor, but we need to fly Eliana's blood there for testing," he said, already organizing the logistics. During one of the dialysis sessions, Mrs. Windsor brought something special, a photo album of Santiago growing up. She had spent the previous night selecting the best photos, those capturing important moments that Eliana had missed. The three women, Eliana in bed, Mrs. Windsor sitting beside her, and a nurse who had grown fond of the patient, leafed through the album together. This was his first day of school. He was so nervous that he threw up at breakfast, Mrs. Windsor recounted, pointing to a photo of Santiago in a new school uniform. Eliana touched each photo with reverence, as if she could somehow absorb the memories through the paper. There were photos of birthdays, Christmases, family vacations, everyday moments that formed the tapestry of a childhood she had observed only from afar. When they came to a photo of teenage Santiago playing soccer, Eliana smiled through tears. "I was there at that game, hidden behind the bleachers, but I was there. He scored 2 goals, she revealed, surprising Mrs. Windsor. The Windsors began bringing more than photos. They brought videos on a tablet, showing Santiago's graduation, his first speech as a businessman, moments in motion that photos couldn't capture. Eliana watched each video multiple times, pausing to observe details, the way Santiago moved his hands when speaking, how he tilted his head when thinking, mannerisms she recognized as her own. "He makes that gesture with his hands just like his father. It's amazing how genetics persists," she observed, pausing a video. After 2 weeks of intensive searching, the news everyone was waiting for finally arrived. A compatible donor had been found in Argentina, a young man who had suffered an accident and was brain dead. The family had agreed to the donation, and all tests showed perfect compatibility. Mr. Windsor chartered a private jet to retrieve the organ, ensuring it would arrive in the necessary time. "We did it, Eliana. The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning," Santiago announced, entering the room with Dr. Smith. Preparation for surgery began immediately. Eliana needed to undergo a final battery of tests, adjustments to her medications, and psychological preparation for the procedure. Mrs. Windsor stayed with her throughout the preparation, holding her hand when fear appeared, talking about light things when the tension became too great. It was strange but comforting to see the woman who had been her rival becoming a source of support. "You're strong, Eliana. You survived 20 years on the streets. You'll survive this too," Mrs. Windsor encouraged. On the night before the surgery, Santiago asked for a moment alone with Eliana. He sat on the edge of the bed, observing her face that showed a mixture of hope and fear. There was so much he wanted to say, so much lost time to make up for, but words seemed inadequate. Eliana broke the silence, reaching for his face with her fragile hand. "If something happens tomorrow, I want you to know it was worth it. Every moment of suffering was worth it, because you grew up and became this wonderful man," she said, her voice breaking. Santiago held her hand against his face, feeling the rough skin marked by years of hardship. He had prepared a speech, words about forgiveness and love, but everything vanished from his mind. Instead, he simply leaned in and hugged her, the first real hug in 20 years. Eliana sobbed against his shoulder, her weak arms squeezing him with all the strength she could gather. "You're going to survive, Mom. We have 20 years to recover. I won't let you go now," he promised, his own tears falling. The morning of the surgery arrived with a clear, sunny sky, which everyone took as a good omen. Eliana was prepared early, dressed in surgical clothes, connected to monitors, with IV access established. The Windsors arrived before sunrise, bringing a small rosary that Mrs. Windsor held nervously. Santiago hadn't slept, spending the night at the hospital, and his eyes showed exhaustion and anxiety. "We're all here with you, Eliana." "We're a family now," said Mr. Windsor, his voice firm despite the emotion. When it was time to take her to the operating room, Eliana asked for a moment. She looked at each of the 3 faces around her stretcher: Santiago, her beloved son; Mrs. Windsor, the woman who had raised her son; Mr. Windsor, the man who had been a father when she couldn't be a mother. With a clear voice, despite the preoperative sedatives, she spoke. "Thank you, all of you, for being here. for giving me this chance, for being a family, even if complicated," she said, a weak but genuine smile on her lips. The surgery lasted 6 hours, the longest in the lives of all who waited. Santiago walked incessantly down the corridor. Mr. Windsor read the same paragraph of the newspaper dozens of times, and Mrs. Windsor prayed quietly. Other patients and family members passed by, some offering words of encouragement upon noticing the group's tension. Every hour, a nurse came with brief updates. Procedure progressing well, kidney being prepared, vascular anastomosis underway. The most critical part went well. "They're finalizing now," the nurse informed in the 5th hour. When Dr. Smith finally appeared, removing his surgical cap, everyone stood up simultaneously. His tired but satisfied face said everything even before his words. The surgery had been a complete success. The new kidney was already producing urine. All signs were positive. Eliana was being taken to recovery and would wake up in a few hours. It was perfect. The kidney started functioning immediately. "She will need care, anti-rejection medication, but the prognosis is excellent," he announced, smiling. The first 24 hours after surgery were critical, with Eliana being constantly monitored in the intensive care unit. Santiago didn't leave the hospital, sleeping in an armchair beside her bed. The Windsors took turns, ensuring that someone was always with her when she woke up. It was Mrs. Windsor who was present when Eliana opened her eyes, initially confused and disoriented. "It's all right, Eliana. The surgery was a success. You have a new kidney working perfectly," she said softly, squeezing Eliana's hand. Eliana's recovery surprised even the most optimistic doctors. Her body, despite being weakened by years of deprivation, showed remarkable resilience. Within a week, she was sitting up in bed, eating solid food, conversing animatedly. Color had returned to her face. Her eyes shined with renewed life. Santiago brought a mirror at her request, and Eliana studied her reflection for long minutes. "I almost look human again. I don't recognize this woman with hope in her eyes," she commented, touching her face. The Windsors established a routine of visits that quickly became an integral part of Eliana's recovery. Every morning, Mrs. Windsor arrived with fresh flowers and had coffee with Eliana, talking about everything and nothing. The afternoons were reserved for Santiago, who brought work to do while keeping Eliana company. In the evenings, Mr. Windsor appeared with card games, discovering that Eliana was an excellent rummy player. "You're letting me win, aren't you?" asked Eliana after winning the 3rd straight game. 2 weeks after surgery, Eliana took her first steps out of bed. It was an emotional moment, with Santiago on one side and Mrs. Windsor on the other, supporting her as she slowly walked around the room. Each step was a victory, each meter traveled an achievement. The physiotherapist had said it would take weeks for her to regain her strength, but Eliana was determined to exceed all expectations. 20 years on the streets taught me to be resilient. This is easy compared to some nights I've spent, she said, taking another step. 1 month after surgery, discussions began about where Eliana would live after being discharged from the hospital. Santiago immediately offered his home. The Windsors offered the guest house on their property, but Eliana had other ideas. With the financial help that Santiago insisted on providing, she wanted a small place of her own, where she could rebuild her life with dignity. After much discussion, they reached a compromise, a small but comfortable house in the same neighborhood, close enough for frequent visits, but allowing independence. "I need to relearn how to have a home. 20 years is a long time to forget how to live between walls," she explained. Eliana's move to her new home was a family event. Santiago took care of all practical aspects. Mrs. Windsor decorated with personal touches, and Mr. Windsor ensured everything worked perfectly. It was a modest but welcoming house, with a small garden that Eliana immediately adopted as a personal project. Seeing Eliana entering her own home for the first time in 2 decades was deeply emotional for everyone. "It's strange to have a key again, to have a place that's mine," she said, tears flowing as she turned the key in the lock. The following months established a new normal for the expanded and complicated family. Santiago visited Eliana daily, usually stopping for breakfast before work. The Windsors came for dinner twice a week, occasions that started uncomfortably but gradually became warm. Eliana was gaining weight, her health consistently improving, and more importantly, she was rebuilding bonds that had been cut so long ago. "I never thought I would have this, a family even if different from normal," she reflected during dinner. Eliana began sharing stories of Santiago as a baby, memories that only she possessed from his early years. She told about his first word, his first steps, small details that the Windsors never knew. In return, they shared stories of the years she had missed, creating a complete narrative of Santiago's life. It was like putting together a puzzle where each person had different but essential pieces. He was always determined, even as a baby. When he wanted something, he wouldn't give up until he got it, Eliana recounted, making everyone laugh. 6 months had passed since the surgery when Mother's Day arrived. Santiago had planned something special, secretly coordinating with the Windsors. When Eliana woke up that Sunday morning, she found her garden transformed. Tables had been set up, decorated with flowers, a party clearly planned with care. Before she could process the surprise, Santiago appeared at the door with a huge smile. "Happy Mother's Day, Mom. You're first at home in 20 years, he said, hugging her. The Windsors arrived soon after, Mrs. Windsor carrying a decorated box and Mr. Windsor bringing covered dishes. Other guests began to arrive. The medical team that had cared for Eliana, some neighbors she had begun to know, creating a small but meaningful celebration. Eliana was overwhelmed, not used to being the center of positive attention after so many years of invisibility. "This is too much. You didn't need to do all this," she said, clearly emotional. Santiago asked for everyone's attention and raised a glass to make a toast. He looked at Eliana, then at the Windsors, his voice clear and full of emotion when he began to speak. He thanked Eliana for her supreme sacrifice, for her unconditional love even from a distance. He thanked the Windsors for being the parents he needed, for giving him every opportunity. "Today I celebrate not one, but 2 mothers, and a father who was more than I deserved. We are a unique family, forged by sacrifice and reunited by forgiveness," he toasted. Mrs. Windsor approached Eliana with the decorated box she had brought. Inside was a new photo album, luxuriously bound but completely empty. With it there was a modern digital camera and a portable photo printer. The message was clear. It was time to create new memories, to fill empty pages with future moments. "You didn't have 20 years of photos together, but you will have all the years to come to fill this album with photos of our Santiago," said Mrs. Windsor, hugging Eliana. Eliana was speechless, holding the album as if it were the most precious object in the world. She looked at each face around her, her son, the parents who raised him, the new friends she had made. It was more than she had dared to dream during those cold nights on the streets. "Thank you, to all of you, for giving me not just my life back, but a reason to live it," she said, her voice choked with emotion. Lunch was served in the garden, with everyone contributing different dishes. Conversation flowed naturally, laughter punctuated the shared stories, and for a few hours, the complications and pains of the past seemed distant. Eliana observed everything with wondering eyes, recording each moment, each sound, each sensation. "Is this real? Sometimes I still think I'll wake up on a cold sidewalk," she confessed quietly to Santiago. During dessert, Eliana had a surprise of her own. She had spent weeks practicing, recovering a long-dormant skill for this moment. She brought from the kitchen a homemade cake, not perfectly decorated, but made with evident love. It was Santiago's favorite cake as a child, a recipe that only she knew. "I remembered the recipe. All those lonely nights. I would recite the ingredients so I wouldn't forget," she explained, cutting the first piece. Santiago tasted the cake with tears in his eyes. The flavor brought long-buried memories, flashes of a small kitchen, of gentle hands feeding him, of unconditional love before all the suffering. The Windsors also tasted it, immediately recognizing it as something special, something no expensive bakery could replicate. "It's perfect, Mom. Exactly as I remembered, even without knowing I remembered," said Santiago, hugging Eliana. Mrs. Windsor asked for the recipe, and what followed was a moment of unexpected connection. Eliana began to explain not just the ingredients, but the tricks, the techniques, the secrets that made the cake special. Soon the 2 women were in the kitchen together, Mrs. Windsor taking notes while Eliana demonstrated. Mr. Windsor and Santiago watched them from the doorway, witnessing the building of a bridge over 20 years of separation. "Look at them. Who would have thought we'd ever see them cooking together?" commented Mr. Windsor. In the kitchen, Eliana was teaching more than a recipe. Each instruction came with a memory, a story of Santiago as a child that she had kept in her heart. Mrs. Windsor listened attentively, adding her own memories of the later years, creating a complete narrative of the life of the man they both loved. Flour flew, laughter echoed, and gradually the two women who had been positioned as rivals by fate were becoming something close to friends. "He always licked the spoon the same way, even as a teenager," laughed Mrs. Windsor. "Mr. Windsor entered the kitchen to help, being immediately recruited to beat egg whites. Santiago was assigned to sift flour, and soon the whole family was involved in the production of more cakes. It was chaotic, messy, and absolutely perfect. Eliana observed the scene with a full heart, seeing her son laughing while Mr. Windsor made jokes about his culinary skills. "This is family. This is what I dreamed of all those lonely nights," she thought, smiling. When the second cake was ready, they took a photo. All four covered in flour, smiling around the freshly baked cake. It was the first of many photos that would fill the new album. Mrs. Windsor printed it immediately, and Eliana placed it on the first page, writing underneath in her best handwriting, "The day we became a complete family." "Perfect to start our album," said Mrs. Windsor, admiring the photo. As the sun began to set, casting golden light over the garden, the guests began to say goodbye. Each one hugged Eliana, wishing her happiness, thanking her for the privilege of witnessing this unlikely reunion. Dr. Smith was the last to leave, discreetly checking Eliana's vital signs and smiling with satisfaction. "Your new kidney is functioning perfectly, but I think the best medicine here is something else," he said, gesturing to the family around her. When only the four of them remained, they sat in the garden watching the sunset. Eliana was in the middle, Santiago on one side, the Windsors on the other. There was no need for words at that moment, each other's presence saying everything that needed to be said. The silence was comfortable, filled with a peace that had taken 20 years to achieve. "You know, I used to watch the sunset alone and imagine what it would be like to be with you," said Eliana softly. Santiago squeezed his mother's hand, feeling the calluses that were finally beginning to soften, the hands that had survived so much now finally able to rest. On the other side, Mrs. Windsor also held Eliana's hand, and Mr. Windsor had his hands on both women's shoulders. It was an image that no one could have imagined months ago, but now seemed absolutely right. "Now you don't need to imagine anymore. We are here, and we will always be," promised Santiago. Night fell gently over the garden, but no one moved to go inside. There was something sacred in that moment, a sense of a circle closing, of wounds finally healing. Eliana began to hum softly a lullaby she used to sing to Santiago as a baby, a melody he didn't know he remembered until he heard it again. Soon, her voice grew stronger, filling the night air with the melancholic sweetness of the music. "I used to sing this when you couldn't sleep. It always worked," she said, smiling at Santiago. The Windsors listened in respectful silence, recognizing the intimate moment between mother and son. But then, surprisingly, Mrs. Windsor began to hum along, harmonizing with Eliana. She knew the song, had researched Brazilian lullabies when Santiago was little, and had nightmares, trying to find something to calm him. The two voices intertwined, creating something beautiful and moving. "You both sang the same song to me," realized Santiago, amazed. When the music ended, they remained in silence again, but it was a different silence. It was the silence of a story coming to an end, of a circle being completed. Eliana looked at each of them, her eyes shining with tears of gratitude. The years of suffering had not been erased. They never would be, but they had been transformed into something meaningful. "Sacrifice separated me from you," she said to Santiago, "but love brought us back together, all of us." Mr. Windsor was the one who broke the silence, standing up and extending his hands to help the women. It was time to go inside, to put away the tables, to clean the kitchen still covered in flour. But it wasn't an end. It was a beginning. As they worked together to tidy everything up, talking about plans for next week, about recipes to try, about pictures to take, the truth was inescapable. We are a family now. Different, complicated, but real, said Mr. Windsor, embracing Eliana for the first time. The end of the night found everyone in Eliana's kitchen, storing away the leftover cake, washing dishes, Mrs. Windsor insisting on noting more details of the recipe, while Eliana laughed, trying to remember exact measurements. Santiago and Mr. Windsor dried the dishes, talking about business, but always including the women in the conversation. It was domestic, ordinary, and absolutely precious. Now tell me in the comments where you're from and tell me, did you like this story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and check out the next one that's waiting for you here on the screen. I'll see you there.